LGR, London Greek Radio.
Hello and welcome to All About Autism, our monthly charity show here on London Greek Radio, aimed at helping us to understand autism better so that we can create a better society for autistics and the whole autism community. My name is Dr. Chris Papadopoulos. I'll be your host for the next hour. I'm a father of 2 autistic children. I'm the founder and lead of the London Autism Group charity, and I'm a principal lecturer in public health at the University of Bedfordshire. Today, I'm joined by my 2 lovely co-hosts and charity volunteers, Sophia Christophi, who is herself autistic, and also Ellie Kolatsi, a parent of an autistic child. How are you doing today, Sophia and Ellie?
Yeah, good. Nice to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back, Sophia.
Yeah, we missed you last month, Sophia. Although I think we just about managed, right?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. So yeah, all is well in your worlds, is it? Hopefully.
Yeah. How are you?
Yeah, I'm recovering from my broken ankle.
Yeah.
I'm less pain, and I'm doing much better. Thanks very much. So, as listeners may know, on each monthly episode we focus on a different topic connected to autism, and for today's show we'll be talking about the difficulties autistic people and families sometimes have with transitions. This includes school-based transitions, the minutiae of daily transitions, and the perspectives of parents and carers. If you've got anything you'd like to share or ask that we can read out live on air, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. You can just text through on 0737 661 1033. That's 0737 661 1033. We'd love to hear from you and we'd be happy to answer or discuss your question or comment live on air. We'd also like to point our listeners to the London Autism Group charity's YouTube channel, which now has every single past All About Autism episode on there, in case you ever wanted to catch up or you've missed a show. To find that, simply go to YouTube and search for London Autism Group charity. Probably best that you subscribe so you don't miss future episodes that we upload there. So, moving on to the topic of today's episode, which is transitions. Maybe Ellie, if you don't mind starting us off. I mean, what do we mean? I suppose the obvious question to start with first is, what do we mean by the term transitions exactly? And why is this something that perhaps some autistic people and families might struggle with?
So a transition is effectively a change, and unconsciously we're moving through lots of changes throughout the day. We're moving from one task and space to another. We say goodbye to our loved ones in the morning and off we go to school or work or whatever it is we're doing. And this is actually a good time to be talking about transitions because we've all sort of transitioned into a new space. It could be a new job, it could be a new education establishment, whatever it is. I know that my son has moved into a new school and we did a lot of preparation with that with regards to moving, because I know how the familiarity of something that he was doing before and environment would have disrupted his emotional well-being. So we did a lot of preparation on him moving to a new school, visiting, talking to the staff, visuals, lots and lots of naming feelings, which is normal about moving into something. And as adults, even us, we feel anxious about something that's unfamiliar to us. So with regards to an autistic person, it's almost amplified. So I think we have to be really conscious of the language that we use with them and take it at their own pace, really, because what we did was we talked about it a bit, then we had a break, and then I left him to his own devices, and really he did his own transition work because the transition booklet was loaded on his laptop, so he was coming back and forth when he felt it's safe to.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, that for autistic people, transitions probably have to be done over a much longer period. Having that sense of familiarity and then having to transition to something completely new can cause a lot of anxiety for autistic people. So planning it really well and making sure that it's a very gradual process helps to kind of reduce those horrible feelings associated with uncertainty.
Yeah. I think with the charity, I think we do get probably an uptick in emails and requests for help when it comes to transitions. You know what I mean? Like supporting with perhaps a new school year. You know, there's been a change from year to year, or school to school, or from primary school to secondary school, or often it could be, you know, that specialist provision wasn't working out, so they've moved schools entirely to another specialist school or whatever it might be, or mainstream specialist. And there's so many different types of transitions, isn't there, in schooling, and all of it, as you said, I think disrupts routine, and if there's not the proper preparation, which is really difficult to get right, do you know what I mean? So you can't beat yourself up about struggling on that front if you're a parent or carer, I guess. But we probably find that. I mean, why is that, do you think, Sophia? Like, what is it about, like, just a little bit more, like, you know, obviously we've discussed it a little bit already, but why do you think transitions is such a difficult thing for autistics and also families?
Yeah, I think for me as an autistic person, I'm very aware of all the kind of little things that change on a day-to-day basis. So for me, I try to make my life as routine-based as possible, so I have some sort of predictability in my day. So once I've established a routine and that's going well and it keeps my anxiety in check, to then have to change that completely and build that new routine, it's not that that's not possible, but it's the bit from going from the old routine to the new routine that's the most problematic, because once I've adjusted to the new routine, then again I'm back into another flow of feeling comfortable and safe.
So routine kind of disruption.
Routine disruptions are difficult,
And probably, would you say executive functioning is linked with that?
Possibly for some autistic people.
Yeah. So we discussed, so executive functioning is the idea that, you know, we, you know, have this sort of cognitive system in us, I suppose in all of us, where we are kind of trying to sort of adapt to the changing perhaps needs and structures of the day ahead, and we're trying to anticipate what's lying ahead and coping with, you know, changes, you know, that may emerge. So I suppose with executive function, I think there is a bit of research that says that it's directly linked with quality of life, you know, so autistics in particular that have perhaps stronger executive functioning systems, and they can cope with perhaps the uncertainty or the unpredictability or all the changes and transitions of the day ahead, are going to perhaps cope a little bit better. Their mental health's a bit better, and there's better outcomes with quality of life. Some of the research shows that. So I guess, you know, this is sort of linked to that, isn't it? Because,
I think a lot of people feel uncomfortable about change, and most people don't like uncertainty. But I think for autistic people, we're much more aware of maybe smaller changes that typically go unnoticed. So that leads to us having much more anxiety. And then it can look like we're being kind of restrictive in our routines, but actually they're really good coping strategies to cope with all the other stuff that changes. So when I went into sixth form, we suddenly didn't have to wear a school uniform. I really liked wearing a school uniform because it was the same every single day. So my way of coping with that was to wear the same clothes on a Monday, the same clothes on a Tuesday. So I made my own uniform. So for me, having that one thing that stayed the same throughout the day helped me better cope with any of the other things that might pop up along the way. The same with always sitting in the same seat. It can come across as being really rigid and particular, but actually they're really good ways of managing high levels of anxiety when you can't predict your environment.
That's really helpful, actually, because those small tips are beneficial for someone who might be doing that, and you think, oh, why are they doing that? But that's what's keeping them safe.
And it makes a big difference to the autistic person, and it may not make such a difference to anybody else. So it's good to let them do that if that's what they find helpful.
we find visuals very helpful. So if we map out a day, so he knows what he's going to do. So if he's at school, he has lots of visuals, so he knows exactly what he's going to do. He's going to go in, he's going to have his registration, his song time, his workstation. So the day, he knows the familiarity of the day, and it's planned. So we have an analogy of a firework. So I've added in a firework. So if something changes and something suddenly takes a different course, it could be good, it could not be good. So we'll try and figure out how we can cope with the sudden change. So what tools have we got to enable you to just try and get on with this change that has been unexpected? So take a walk, get your favourite comforter, take a comfort break. Does that make sense?
Yeah, which are really important to have, because you'll never be able to stop something from unexpectedly changing.
Life's unpredictable.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
So it's always good to have those skills so that when things do change, you're better able to manage it as best as you can.
Yeah, and linked to that, I've heard of the idea of transitional special objects, of meaning, so that you have something perhaps that you, especially perhaps if you are going from end of school term to holidays, and you're a young child, and you just need an anchor of familiarity. That can be quite helpful in getting through.
Do you mean something from school to home, and to link the two together? Yes, to just have something of familiarity with you during the transition, so you're not completely lost.
Yeah.
And that sounds like reasonable advice to me. But going back to your analogies and your examples, I mean, I was recently we'd bought a new picture to hang up on our son's wall, on my autistic son's wall. He's 7 years old, in his bedroom. And he's got it in his mind as to where, what pictures he's got and where they're located, and he's comfortable with that. And I knew that if I even slightly rearranged that could have, perhaps triggered some anxiety. And that is a transition, isn't it? If you're going to be moving things, it's a change, yeah. So knowing that, I sort of, I took a picture of what I thought the room would look like, and I rearranged it on the computer, and I changed it to sort of match what it will eventually look like, because you can do that these days with graphics programs. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's really good.
And he could sort of visualize what it would be like, and then I sort of did it with him. That's the other thing I think about transitions. You want to try and, as much as possible, plan and change with them rather than impose.
Yeah, definitely. If you can include the autistic person in the transition plans and take it at their pace as well, it's really important to feel like we're still in control.
Exactly.
Especially if there's a big change coming up and it's likely to cause a lot of anxiety. Being able to have a say in how it goes or how fast we move with it is really important.
I think that's what I always had in the back of my mind, to allow him some control over it, because we're always pushing and pulling. You've got to come here, you've got to do that. But if they have some control over what they do and how they do it, then it just flows a little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, in our case, again, even the new picture that we hanged up, he chose it. You know what I mean? It was the one he wanted. It was just navigating the change and arranging things in his room that we needed to, we sort of did it together, and like
that
you
would
say,
give me anxiety though, if you're changing my environment and then you put a picture up.
But I think what Chris is saying also highlights that actually even something that can be positive can be difficult. So it's a picture that he wanted, it's a picture that he's chosen, but still the actual transition of taking it into the house and putting it up on the wall, even though it's something he really likes, is still having that element of anxiety. So it's not necessarily like the big scary changes that we think of, like changing schools or moving house, but it can actually be things that the child or the young person wants but is struggling to adapt to that newness of it.
And then there's the sensory aspects as well, because if that, I mean, it might sound odd to say, but it could be that a new painting or a new picture or a new item in your bedroom changes the smell even
Yes.
of the environment.
Agree.
You know what I mean? And he does have quite a sensitive sort of sense in that smelling sense. So in terms of the sensory impact as well, that it can have an impact on the experience of the sensory environment. That also is a part of the challenge. Yeah. Okay, really interesting stuff. So, as always, we do welcome any questions or points of view from our listeners, whether it's about this topic or anything really to do with autism. We'll discuss it. So, if you have anything you'd like to share or ask, please do feel free to get in contact with us. You can text us at 0737 661 1033. That's 0737 661 1033. We would really love to hear from you, and for now stay tuned and we'll have a short break, and see you in a minute.
Welcome back, everyone. A quick reminder to listeners that you can text us on 0737 661 1033 if you'd like for us to discuss your question or simply to share your thoughts. We'd really love to hear from you. And on that note, Chris does have a message to share.
Yeah, delighted to see that we've got a message that's been sent to us by Yanis. Thank you, Yanis. So Yanis's message is as follows. Hi everyone, really enjoying the show All About Autism. My son is 16 and he takes his iPad with him when we go out. It really helps him navigate the transitions of travelling when we have to get from one place to another. Keep up all the amazing work with the show and all the things that you do for the London Autism Group charity. You're legends in my house. Oh, thank you very much, Yanis. You're now a legend for us as well in the studio. So, Ellie, have you got any thoughts about this comment about the son?
Thanks for taking the time to text in, firstly, because it is quite a big thing, and we appreciate your feedback, so thank you. Yes, if it works, don't change it.
Yeah.
And if it's enabling him to come out of the house and it's a smooth transition from where you're going, and it helps him manage that and cope, leave him.
Yeah, I also think things like iPads when it comes to travelling can be quite helpful, especially if you're using headphones and stuff, to reduce all the sensory input. It's just focusing on whatever the person's watching or a game they're playing can help block out all the other stimuli that's can be quite overwhelming when you're trying to travel from one place to another.
Yeah, I agree with everything. And I'll just add, though, that I've seen sometimes, especially in the Greek community, I mean, I think it's everywhere, but often among Greeks, I think, and maybe in particular, there's a bit of a stigma when it comes to the use of iPads and things like that. It's sort of frowned upon. He's always on the iPad, or too much iPad use, or too much TV, too much screens are bad for his health or bad for their health, or whatever. And that's not necessarily true. Of course, there's always balance is always best.
Yeah.
But in a case like this, where we're talking about transitions and the anxieties that happen during those transitions, don't be thinking, well, he's used all of his iPad screen time up. We can't be using that to assist us. No, you've got to always prioritise whatever works for his mental health first. And if that's going to help him or her, or whoever it might be, with their anxiety, then that should come always first.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think for a lot of autistic people, our phones and iPads and gadgets are a really important like self-regulation tool. So of course you don't want to be on it all day long, but at those kind of crucial points where the anxiety is likely to be really high and unmanageable, then if that's a strategy that works, then I think it should be encouraged. And
when you said about regulation, can you say a bit more about that?
Just as in just trying to like self-manage feelings of anxiety to stop it getting from that to that point where it's so overwhelming that you're not able to carry out the task, or it's impacting on how you're feeling and your mood and stuff. So it's just having these tools that can allow you to kind of cope in any given situation.
Can I quickly add as well, just from a parent perspective, do what works for you, and if that works for you, doesn't matter about what anyone says. I know it takes a bit of time for you to kind of get through that, but if it works for you, everyone is individual, everyone has different tools and techniques. Please just do what works. That's all I can say.
Yeah. And, you know, it may very well be that your child or whoever it is seems to be on their iPad or on their TV or computer system longer than what you might have sort of hoped for or expected, or if you compare it to other people, it seems like they're on it for longer. But that's probably not because of anything other than the fact that they're experiencing more anxiety than other people, and so therefore perhaps they're sort of having to go there with that to cope. And if you remove it unnecessarily, especially if they're, you know, really enjoying it and perhaps they have a particular passion for it or expertise for it, then, you know, I mean, honestly, what are we prioritising? So we've got to prioritise the right things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you, Yanis, for your question.
Yeah.
We still have time if anyone else wants to send in another question or provide a comment or anything like that. And the number again, just in case you do want to do that, is 0737 661 1033. That's 0737 661 1033. Okay.
So just going back to transitions, Chris, what are some of the main types of school-based transitions autistic children might find particularly difficult?
Yeah, so there's actually lots and lots of different types of school-based transitions. There's so many. I mean, think about it. Your child is going to spend a significant portion of their day at school, you know, and so there's a lot of potential for changes during that time. But I think you could start right at the moment when they wake up, you know, from waking up to, you know, going through their morning routine, you know, including having breakfast and brushing their teeth, whatever it may be, putting on the uniform, and then getting the first major, I suppose, transition would be travelling from home to school. That's often a tricky one, and I know, Ellie, sometimes you know, you have experiences with this one as well. Maybe you want to talk about that or not, I'm not sure. But home to school is a significant one. And then, of course, from school back home is a transition. You've got class to class is a transition, so navigating from one class to another. That might seem easy for you, but for many autistic people, it may very well be that itself is an enormous, you know, source of anxiety. Activity to activity within a class is another transition, especially if you know, it's not an activity you're familiar with or you expected. You know, I suppose that might happen more if you've got like a temporary teacher, you know, like a covering teacher that's, you know, perhaps doing something that is a little different. Then you've got class to lunch and lunch to class. Then you've got year to year is another one, you know, going from year to year. You've got changing schools as well. So I've got a friend who's two children, young children, primary school children, changed schools completely, and one of the children is neurodivergent, and there was a lot of planning and preparation involved in that, because that's a major. I mean, the uniform's different, the smells are different, the people are different, everything is different. That's one of the biggest transitions, isn't it? I guess. And then, of course, some autistic children might have EHCPs, and they might have occupational therapy or speech and language therapy built into their routine. So going from their standard classroom activity to a specialist provision therapy type of activity could be also another transition. Of course, the big one, as we already alluded to, is the end of terms or the end of years and going on holiday or that side of things. So there's lots and lots and lots of different transitions. Would you guys agree? Have I missed anything?
No, I think that covers a lot of them.
It does.
I think the most difficult transition for me at school was the summer holidays in particular, because I had my routine was all built around my everyday at school. So come to the summer holidays, that 6-week break felt like such a long time. So I used to come to the end of term and really not want to break up, and then we did break up from school. And then I'd get so used to being at home during the 6 weeks holiday that it was a problem going back. So, yeah, all these transitions, so many of these transitions are overlooked as seemingly really small things. So back earlier where Chris said, you know, from getting dressed to brushing your teeth to leaving the house, I would call these like micro transitions,
Yeah.
the small things that most people don't even consider as transitions. But for an autistic person, when we're sitting there and we're absorbed in the one task we're doing and then have to go and do something else, it seems like it's just moved from here to there, but actually there's so much involved, because now we're trying to predict, but what's going to happen when we leave the house, and how long is it going to take us, and what if our usual route's blocked, and all the anxiety that's associated with it, that even these tiny transitions can be very anxiety provoking.
Absolutely. Well, what we're finding now in the morning is we have to wait for a cab. We don't know who the cab driver is, and they change every day. The route, of course, changes. So very kindly, the school had thought about it, because he would go in quite anxious. So they printed out a map of the route from our house to the school, which I thought was a really clever idea. And they said, this is normally the route. However, if it changes, it doesn't matter. And those kind of words resonated with him. It kind of did, and it didn't, because he was holding the map this morning in the car.
Yeah.
And he was expecting to go on a certain route. However, his teacher had said, if you do go on a different route, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think it's helpful to have kind of multiple options.
Yeah.
So like when I drive places, I will always drive the original route that I took, even if that means going out of my way. But what I've learned to do now is to have multiple routes, that I know that if my safe route isn't available, then my next best option is this.
Yeah.
So that I'm not completely unprepared for it. It's not my preferred route, but I don't feel so... And this doesn't involve like just doing it on the day. It's a practice route. So it's an extra route that I will go and drive to, even though I don't need to go there, just so I've got it in my head and what it's going to be like. So I think sometimes having little backup plans can be quite helpful, so that it's not fixated on that one particular way of doing it, especially if something happens and that's not possible.
Yeah,
that's a really good point about the backup plans. Just going back to micro transitions within the school context, I remember my son, he would struggle. We didn't know this at the time, but the teachers had moved where he sat, so his sort of seat with his table had sort of changed, and that threw him. And we didn't know it until we did a bit of investigatory work, and we sort of found that out in passing with talking to the teacher. And even that, that might not seem like a big deal for some, but that changes. I mean, if you're someone who depends a lot on visual, for example, sensory input, the perspective changes, also the auditory sort of side of things change where you're sitting. So, something seemingly small like that could be a big thing. And, I just wanted to say before I forget that, with all these transitions, I think part of it, I know we've been talking a lot, that is a lot, it's strongly associated with anxiety and routines, but I think it's also linked strongly with PDA and demand avoidance, like PDA being a pathological demand avoidance, which I'm not sure is necessarily the best way of framing it. I'm still sort of on the fence with that, but the idea of demand avoidance I think is definitely important, because if you think about it, every transition, especially if it's one that's not planned or desired or expected, right, that's a demand, isn't it? Even if it is planned and expected, it's still a demand. But if it's not planned and expected, it's even bigger demand. And if for a lot of autistics and neurodivergent people, coping with the accumulation of demanding requests that might seem small to you, but they are quite challenging, especially if there's sensory things thrown in there. These demands stack up, and that's what's often resulting in the anxiety, the fear that you're not coping, that you're struggling, and how you're going to get through the day. Am I going to upset people? I don't want to upset people, and then the anxiety comes from all of that, doesn't it?
I think but I think we could go back to having some sort of autonomy and control over things, which is really important, so that doesn't happen. Yes, we do have lots of demands placed on you, but I think scaling it back and allowing for a bit of space is really important, don't you think, Sophia?
Yeah, and I think for a lot of autistic people, once there's been, I know certainly for me, once there's been one change in the day, then I start to think, but what if this changes, and then what if that changes, and then my ability to anticipate the rest of the day starts to feel like sort of under pressure. So it's why I have certain things that I always do the same way, because I know that that's my one bit of constant in what is an ever-changing world situation.
You need those anchors, don't you?
So that
safety anchors.
Yeah, that it feels safe. But definitely kind of one little transition can then make me start to question all the other things that might change during the day, and before any of those changes have even happened, I'm already anxious and like trying to preempt what the rest of the day is going to be like. There's lots of things that I think most people just probably don't even think about in terms of transition and change, but that are big things for autistic people.
I'm often sort of highlighting how wrapped up in demands all of this is to parents and carers in particular who contact us and say that my child is struggling with X, Y, Z. You know, so much of it is often about demands that you don't realise that it's a demand. Do you know what I mean? That you've put a demand, or not intentionally, or maybe it's a required demand, but it's still a demand, and it adds up. Anyway, we actually do have another message, this time from Jenny. Thank you for texting, Jenny. Jenny says, my 5-year-old grandson is refusing to wear clothes. This is very difficult. For example, in terms of going to school, he's refusing to wear clothes. Very, very difficult situation, Jenny. Of course, you know, he's going to have. I mean, that's the thing. Some sort of demands are, really required ultimately. So it's very difficult. What's your sort of initial response to Jenny's concern there, or challenge, let's say, Ellie?
What is the type of clothing? Is it uniform? Is it?
Doesn't specify, but I was thinking the same. It might be
that
sensory.
just came in mind because I'm quite sensory, and there are particular things that I don't like to wear. And as soon as I get clothing, I cut out the labels, which is really annoying because I don't know how to wash them. But but I was just thinking how sensitive he is. Do you think, Sophia?
Yeah, my first thought was if it's a sensory-based thing.
Issue,
and even if it is a school uniform, there's lots of places now that kind of do more sensory-friendly clothing. So there might be seamless tops, much softer trouser material, things like that. So if it is school uniform, it might be a case of having to find something that's a little bit more appropriate for his sensory experience, and maybe gradually getting used to it. So it might be that the clothes that he needs to wear to school, he wears them at home for a little bit to see how long he can manage with it.
Yeah.
So it's not a sudden, you now need to wear all these clothes and go to school. If it's broken down into smaller stages, it might become something that he can tolerate a bit better.
Yeah, actually my son had the same exact issue. When he was at around the same age of 5, he wouldn't wear certain types of clothes that were a bit more, perhaps, I guess, not tight, but tighter fitting, let's say. Regular kind of trousers instead of jogging trousers, let's say. Or jeans. I think jeans was a particular problem because they're a little bit on the heavier side, and they're a little bit more grabby sometimes, I suppose. So I agree with everything you said. I suppose at least in my son's case, I saw that he was able to, adapt and to cope better through the years, and he now has no problems wearing different types of clothes. So I think it's worth saying that sometimes sensory profiles do change over time.
And sometimes it is an age-related thing, so something that might affect an autistic person when they're very young, it doesn't necessarily follow through with them to adulthood. There might be different things that they can tolerate as they get older, or, things change. It depends on, especially the sensory stuff. I think it also depends on the amount of resources you've got left for that day anyway. So if you've had a really busy day at school and things have just been extra tiring, you might be particularly sensitive, and there might be other days where things are a lot calmer and easier to manage. So there is kind of some flexibility there.
The only other thing I could think of in this case is if it's happening before school, if it's happening in the morning, maybe it's communication that he's not happy with the school.
Yeah.
You know,
it's just an association with where am I going, why am I going there?
Yeah, I don't want to put this uniform on because it represents going.
Where I'm going.
Yeah.
I actually don't want to go.
Yeah.
Or I was also thinking about perhaps visuals and just laying out a picture of a top, his jumper, his trousers, his socks, and perhaps just giving him what he wants to put on first.
Might help. In his order. You're absolutely right. Great point.
And then just kind of do one thing at his pace. I know we're always so fast paced, and that's the demand in the morning. We've got to get ready, we've got to go to work, we've got to go on to the next thing. But I think sometimes we have to go at their pace.
Yeah, I suppose in her case, having just reread it though, she's saying that he's refusing to wear any clothes, so it is likely to be a sensory thing. But you know, don't give up. No. You know, think it through, sort of like a detective, in terms of what exactly is the type of material that he's having problems with, and you know, use Ellie's suggestions of kind of like visuals, and
maybe take him shopping and let him feel the clothes that he wants to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you know, at the end of the day, if the school is reasonable, if it's a nursery school or whatever it is, they should you know, allow for flexibility. If they don't,
again,
if they're that rigid,
adjustment, isn't it?
That's a reasonable adjustment. Absolutely. And if they don't, and they're strict about that, I'm sorry to say, it's just not just change school, just change environment, and that might be why I was refusing to go in the first place, you know? So thank you, Jenny, for sending through that question. I suppose we'd better go to a quick break, and then after that we'll spend a few minutes talking about the perspective of parents and carers as quickly, and then we'll wrap up, shall we? So a quick break, and we'll be right back. Thank you.
Ellie, I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts about the impact of transitions on parents and carers, both neurotypical or neurodivergent?
It definitely impacts, as the two texts have kind of come through, and the messages are stating that how and what we can do with regards to the transition and how it affects the children and young people. I think it's really listen and observe and do your detective work. Try and think, how can I make this better for you and everyone around, because obviously it's affecting you, and also how I'm responding to you. So if I'm not responding to you correctly, then I'm not going to get the right response. So I think being open to whatever's going on and trying to, again, talk to autistic people. I think this is a really important point, isn't it? What works, what's helpful. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it can be quite tricky when you're in a household with people that've got differing needs as well. So, like for me, transitions, I need all the planning. I'd like to plan my day down to the minute if I could. Whereas my mum is very spontaneous, likes to do things randomly. So sometimes it's also about having to find a compromise, because I need a lot of support with the transitions, but she doesn't need that much support with it. So we kind of have to meet in the middle, which is much easier for me to do now that I'm older. But I would say as a child, she probably had to come closer to meeting me where I was. But yeah, I guess that's what happens in neurodivergent families or neurotypical families. Everybody has different needs when it comes to transition. So it's about figuring out a way of balancing it so that everybody's coping as best as they can.
Yeah, that's great advice. I'll just finally add that bear in mind, you know, so it can be very, of course, challenging and difficult for parents and carers and grandparents and so forth. You know, you worry and there's a lot of challenges and you're confused, and you know that is all absolutely valid. But bear in mind that, you know, your children, whoever it is that is autistic, is likely to be hyper empathic, right? And so therefore they're likely to be particularly in tune with the way you're feeling. So if you're feeling very stressed or upset and angry, just bear in mind that your child, even if they're perhaps struggling with their speech and language, it's very likely that they're quite in tune with that. So
agree with that.
be mindful of that as well. All right, so I suppose that brings us to the end of another episode. Went by very quickly.
It did.
Well, our next show will take place on the 2nd of November at 7 p.m, which, as always, is the first Thursday of the month. I'd like to remind you to pop into one of our charity community cafes to meet the community if you'd like to find support and connect with others. Currently, we have community cafes in Southgate, Islington, Ealing and Woodford. All of the information about these community cafes and how else the charity might be able to support you can be found on our website, which is londonautismgroupcharity.org. That's londonautismgroupcharity.org. And a reminder, you can find the recordings of these episodes on our YouTube channel, which you can find by searching for London Autism Group Charity on YouTube. Thanks again to my wonderful co-hosts Sophia and Ellie, also to the amazing Tony Neofidel for helping with everything in the background, also to James Gordon for his editorial input, and of course the biggest thanks is to all of you lovely listeners. Thank you very much and have a great month.
Bye.
On FM, on digital radio, on your mobile and online. This is London Greek Radio.